All right, friends, we will get started. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Dan Scoggin. I'm the co-founder of Great Hearts. And I see headmasters here, dear old friends, teachers. So thank you so much for coming. The last two keynote addresses were just wonderful. Matthew Crawford last night and Sir Jonathan Bates. So we'll continue the conversation about wonder. And in this workshop, it's truly a workshop. So I'm going to have you work. So if you don't have one of those double-sided handouts, they're on the screen there on the black table where the projector is. I also put some on the seats. We're going to get to that activity in about 15 minutes. But before I get started, I wanted to thank our sponsor for this session, Cana Academy. I see Andrew Zornman here. This gentleman right here was the headmaster of the school where I was first a teacher, a good friend. So thank you for being here, Andrew. And he's the founder of Cana Academy. Cana Academy is an academy for humanities teachers. They host two websites, www.canaacademy.org and www.history250.org. The Cana Academy site is dedicated to serving teachers who want to develop great discussions for great texts. You will find everything you need to lead seminars. That's really one of their core competencies is how to properly lead an objective Socratic seminar, teach writing, and to master the art of teaching classical, imaginative, and expository works. At History 250, they are telling America's story one film at a time, and their goal is to create 250 short, really teacher and student digestible documentaries on the most important events in American history, plus a bank of maps and historical documents that teachers can use in their lessons. So the purpose of an hour goes really fast. And so I'm going to try to be very disciplined about sort of breaking this up into three parts, the rule of threes. So I'm going to give a brief talk on what is classical wonder, especially as it relates to virtue. I want to kind of define our terms a bit. So I'll talk for about 15 or 20 minutes on that. And then I'm going to break you up into groups and have you play school leader. I know many of you are school leaders, but play school leader with probably groups of 5 or 6 each, and do a campus assessment according to some core categories of wonder busters and then wonder builders. So, what are some of the hindrances on a campus that can block wonder from being cultivated in children and young men and women? And then, what are some practical solutions to changing that on a campus? What are some things that we can do? And then the last 15 or 20 minutes, we'll do a readout. So we'll go around to groups with one or two practical suggestions from each group. Well, we'll see how that goes. There might be a lot of groups, so we'll see how far we get. And then we'll wrap up promptly. So if you want to make the lunch line earlier than others, you can. So, when you think about wonder and character, they may seem like strange bedfellows at first. The experience of wonder is ephemeral, in some cases passing, temporary, while character speaks to lasting virtue, a career virtue in a child or a young man and woman. Conviction strongly held, a stable life of virtue. So the ephemeral nature of wonder, those moments of wonder versus virtue and character, which is long standing in the soul, they may seem at sort of opposite ends or in contrast. But I think as classical educators and classical campus creators, we need to understand the enduring link between wonder and virtue. There's the passage in the handout from Aristotle's Metaphysics. That's a very important passage. It's sort of the most privileged passage on wonder in the classical tradition. Aristotle says there that through wonder of the cosmos, man originally began to philosophize. Remember, philosophy, the love of wisdom. The direction of wisdom comes out of that inspiration for us to wonder at the cosmos, at the stars, at nature, at human relationships. And out of that moment of wonder, we begin the journey towards the first of the cardinal virtues, wisdom itself, philosophia, and its pursuit. So the link between wonder and virtue needs to be, I think, strongly held by us as classical educators. Wonder can be that spontaneous moment of epiphany. I think of Wordsworth talks about sunsets and in the prelude where he's struck by the sunsets, and there's just this transcendent, sublime moment. And we can have those moments. Here in Arizona, we get great sunsets. Sometimes I'll pull over. They're so good, you just kind of need to pause, and it's going to disrupt my driving. So we all have those moments, or where you're working on a really difficult math problem that's maybe stumped you for a week. I know you do that at home. You work on complex math problems. Some of us do. And then all of a sudden you see this elegant solution to something that was holding you back. So wonder, are those moments of epiphany for sure, those blinding moments where we're struck by the transcendent, by something much deeper, where the reality kind of shines through to show us something deeper. But in exploring classical wonder, I'm more interested, I love those moments of epiphany, but I'm more interested in the form of wonder that we may describe as lasting curiosity that we build up in our students' souls, a longing to understand the deeper reality behind what is known so far. This is the wonder that builds up in the young soul over time based on experience and the training of their hearts and minds. Young hearts whose imaginations are formed by great authors and artists and inspired by the examples of great teachers. Young minds expand their comprehension through deeper study and their thought through advanced writing in seminars, labs, problem sets, translations, and performances. These advancements up the summit of learning begin in wonder. Wonder is the starting point when students first see that our ideas are as real as the chair they sit in or the floor that they stand in, where they can build on truth, goodness, and beauty and hold ideas. So wonder is that it's a lifelong process, but it takes time. It's cultivated very carefully in a classical school. So when I use classical wonder, I'm referring to the deliberate cultivation through the liberal arts disciplines, through the subjects that we teach, to push students up the pathway of wonder. So to this point, I want to talk about what I think are four essential understandings of classical wonder. First, classical wonder presumes intelligibility. So, intelligibility, moral philosophers use this word to talk about how the world is ordered and our mind, the human intellect, is designed to pursue reality, to understand external reality. So it speaks to the connection, this classical connection between our minds and objective reality. Sometimes we call this philosophical realism, the love of wisdom, that we can love things that are real. So, as classical teachers, we're not skeptics. We're like Socrates. We depart from a point of confidence that things can be found and known. Now, it's hard. Some of our knowledge that we develop in kindergartners, high school students, ourselves is provisional. It's very difficult to understand mathematics, to understand nature, science, deep literature. We debate, we interpret, we go further, but we push forward with confidence that we can know more about reality through a concerted effort with the disciplines and our conversations with one another. Our minds don't exist on a Cartesian island, but in fact are linked to an objective reality outside the self. Classical wonder does not really exist without this sense of intelligibility. This correspondence is a point of beauty when it's found, and it's seen repeatedly. We are built to contemplate, and our happiness, according to this tradition, is tied up in this internal external correspondence. Albert Einstein wrote, quote, "How can it be that mathematics, being after all a product of human thought, which is independent of experience, is so admirably appropriate to the objects of reality? Is human reason then, without experience, merely by taking thought, able to fathom the property of real things?" So Einstein sees this. There's something in the human mind that's meant to think mathematically, and it's connected to mathematical realities that they see in the natural world. There's something in the human mind that's meant to think and experience reality through music. It's inside us, but we find that correspondence outside ourselves. We're meant to think philosophically, and we see in human relationships and our own nature the corresponding objective reality of those philosophical connections. So wonder is that moment when we sense our internal pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty fits with an objective reality outside ourselves. Wonder is that bridge point between us, and the world. Secondly, while classical wonder is supported by trained emotions and habits, it's not just a feeling. So, classical wonder is the bridge point between the intellect and I would argue between moral reality, between the moral virtues. So, let me explain. Wonder is when our desires are well formed and mature to support the intellect, seeking and perceiving the right things, the true, the good, and the beautiful. So, wonder is an act of intellect. Imagination is an act of the intellect, right? It's the mind's eye seeing and looking outside of itself. But if it's not supported by good habits, a longing to pursue things that are noble outside the self, it's diminished. And this is Aristotelian in this sense, where the moral virtues, the moral habits that are cultivated in the earliest ages for a child, where parents begin in the home, us kindergarten teachers, first, second, third grade teachers, we develop the moral habits. So students long for great things, nourishing things. They long for beauty. They long for what Plato says are the noble things. And we teach students to be repulsed by the ignoble things that are lesser, that are not reality, that are not as beautiful and lasting outside the self. And then when the age of reason comes to bear, when students come into the age of wisdom, they have the moral virtues to stand on to pursue wonder. Aristotle teaches us, if he teaches us anything, it's that the leadership of wisdom in our souls is dependent on the corresponding health of our moral virtues. St. Augustine defines virtue as ordo amoris, loving the right things to the right degree. Aristotle says that the aim of education is to make the pupil like and dislike what he ought. Or as C.S. Lewis sums up, quote, without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism. A heart well shaped and trained is the engine that allows the intellect to pursue wonder. This is why wonder takes many, many years to develop this lasting curiosity in the soul. And again, C.S. Lewis writes, quote, the head rules the belly through the chest, the seat of magnanimity of emotions organized by trained habits into stable sentiments over time. The third point I would make about classical wonder is so much of modern education is designed against classical wonder. Students may be overwhelmed by the tyranny of the visible. They sit in the blue light of screens hour after hour and spend their time looking down instead of up. Or students may receive instruction from teachers who are directed only to meet standards and outcomes at the expense of never getting to questions that elicit wonder. The school day may simply lack places of moments or beauty that elicit greatness out of our students, that call them outside of themselves, beyond their limited and inward-looking experiences. Teenagers are naturally designed to be inward-looking, look for reality inside themselves, right? So much of progressive modern education is directed towards that experience, and digital media just pushes it down, pushes them inside themselves again. How do we create cultures where they look up and out to what's most noble beyond themselves? What Alfred Lord Whitehead calls a habitual vision of greatness. Or a classroom or the school in general may be so disordered and loud that a student can't hear himself or herself think. For the sake of outcomes, state mandated or self imposed, do we herd and hustle children throughout the day to their own detriment? How can wisdom grow amidst the factory and assemblage of the modern school day? Are we more interested in grade percentages than we are in the quality of our students' thoughts and love? In our attempt to meet our own professional objectives, well intended as they might be, do we organize wonder right out of the building? In contrast, as Joseph Pieper would say, a community of practice based in reading, art, and contemplation is the best defense against falling into a degraded world of total work. How do we cultivate contemplation from kindergarten through 12th grade at our schools? Fourth, and lastly, classical wonder involves hard work. Hard work. Let's not mistake schools committed to cultivating wonder for places where students simply wander around with their heads in the clouds. This is not a Montessori wonder when I think of classical wonder. No offense, there's good things about Montessori. Miriam Mirzakhani, mathematics field medal winner, said, quote, the beauty of mathematics only shows itself to its more patient followers, end quote. Likewise, Enselin remarks that memory, grammar, and arithmetic are the doorkeepers to the imagination for the young. So, Eleanor Patient reciting that poem, how much work did that take? Practice that. She has that poem in her soul for the rest of her life. She can wonder about it. What a connection between the external world that Frost has created and her own heart, her own mind. We must hear, remember, see, and know before we can wonder about what we contemplate afresh. Technical skill is the discipline that sets the stage for deeper wonder. You can't dream or paint a masterpiece until you know how to draw. I know Demerit, as Mr. Smith is here, he would say that as well. I mean, teaching a student to draw carefully is creating the conditions for them to wonder more fully about art as they master the craft. Schools that create the best conditions for wonder are places that cultivate intentional culture, rich content, and order joy. And this is the work that classical educators do every day. To close my opening comments here, the capacity to wonder creates the conditions for virtue that is personally held for its own sake. Instruction and morality, we know preaching to kids, especially teenagers, does not work. What does work in developing, especially the adolescent soul, is habitual wonder of things that are greater than themselves. Intellectual, aesthetic, and moral habits last. Above all, love lasts. Vegan Gorian, he's here. I don't know if you ran into Vegan. He's a legend here at the conference and across classical education. Vegan Gorian writes that instead of preaching to kids about what they should care about, quote, a compelling vision of the goodness of goodness itself must be presented in a way that stirs the imagination. So this is the final connection I'm trying to make about the relationship between wonder and character. Teaching students to wonder and seek reality beyond themselves in the right way for the right things, being prudent, doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason, and seeking and pointing their imagination towards truth, goodness, and beauty, that's going to allow them to have the best chance of being objectively good and developing a good character. The imagination sees what reason cannot. For Gurian, he calls it the moral imagination. We might call it moral wonder. It's a trained capacity for relating lived experiences to the best narratives provided by the best literature, starting with fairy tales for the young, and at least at Great Hearts, ending with reading the Brothers Karamazov in 12th grade. Aristotle says that a virtuous man acts for the sake of the noble. For the philosopher, the noble, kalan, means the beautiful, the fine, the resplendent. When we wonder, we are attracted to and seek what is noble, and in so doing, take on the noble ourselves. So when we hope that our students will eventually become wise, we are over the right target when we ask them to wonder about what is truly beautiful, when we develop their imaginations through the disciplines and for the disciplines. As James Matthew Wilson states to close, quote, wisdom therefore, there's a lot to this quote, we can ponder it quite a bit. Wisdom therefore may be understood as the soul's vision of the beautiful shape of things in themselves and all their relations. So that's my outline through those four principles of the relationship between wonder and cultivating wonder over time in our schools, creating that space and forming virtuous young men and women by the time they graduate. So what I'd like to do now is have you do some work together. So what we're going to do is, I think it's probably about 5 or 6 people per group. So I'm going to ask you to be very commanding and get organized. So break up into groups of 5 or 6. You can kind of turn your chairs around. We can mess the room up as much as we want. We'll put it back together. But I'd like you to have a conversation and think like a classical school leader. I know there are many classical school leaders here, but you're all classical school leaders. You've all gone to a school, maybe your children go to a school. You have plenty of lived experience to use for this workshop. And what I'd like you to do is you can use this quote from Aristotle as kind of a quick reference point just to kind of jog your memory about the conditions for classical wonder, or the talk that I gave. I offer some examples using Aristotle's vocabulary of what might be an area of dysfunction in a school about cultivating wonder. And then on the bottom, just to kind of jog your creativity, on the bottom of the first page, I put 10 categories of wonder killers on a campus. I kind of referred to a few of these, but these are some areas where wonder may be hindered. But the main goal that I'd like you to do in the groups for the next sort of 20 minutes is flip this chart over, or flip the document over, and on the back there's a chart, and I want you to pick in your group 2 or 3 areas. You could pick the area of campus aesthetics and order, the use of time, student culture. You can see here faculty culture. Pick an area and get quite specific about an example that you've seen or you know about, or you think might be consistent in education today based on your knowledge. That's a specific wonder killer that hinders this relationship between wondering, reality, and developing virtue in our children. And then a practical solution. I mean, really practical. I'm not looking high. It doesn't need to be a business plan. It doesn't need to be something that quotes, Heidegger or quotes Aristotle, but something very practical that you could do in a week, a month, or over the course of a school year to turn that wonder killer around into a way that's supportive of developing wonder as opposed to hindering it. Does that assignment make sense? Okay, I'll walk around if I can provide any clarification, but it's now 10:51. I'm going to give you, please, until 11:15 or 11:17 to work together, and then I'm going to go around and we'll kind of call out some best ideas to share some readouts with the group. So go to it. Okay, my friends, let's start to come back together here. Let's you can leave the chairs where they are. That's fine. Okay, well let's popcorn up. Let's do some readouts from the groups. We'll just go by volunteers. So I know there's a lot of brave souls here in the room. So and make sure you sort of, what's the campus area that you're referring to, the specific kind of wonder buster or wonder killer, and then a practical solution you can share with your colleagues. But I'll just hand the mic to whoever wants to go first, and we'll just keep rolling. So who wants to go first? What brave soul? I'll call in a group. All right. Extra credit for going first.
So the beautiful thing about classical education, right, is we as educators are learning with our students. So we were talking in our group about a couple of things, but one of the things that kept coming up was student culture and how so often in our classrooms, we're used to teaching from the front and giving out information to students and kind of like a file cabinet education where we're teaching them math and history and English. And that sometimes it's hard for our students to want to participate and engage in being part of finding the answer, right? So much of what we're learning is that we want students to discover through wonder, through curiosity, what the answers are. So we were talking about sometimes that's hard when you get students that are transferring in that aren't used to our culture. And we're trying to teach them the skill of wonder, this skill of curiosity. And so we talked about just a couple things, providing opportunities, things like seminar within our classrooms where students can learn to share ideas and they don't have to feel like they have to get the right answer, because so often our kids don't want to engage because they think we're waiting for the right answer. So we talked about how important it would be to create like a safe culture where kids can understand that they can make mistakes and that we're all growing together, teacher included. Teacher doesn't have all the answers. So we are talking about modeling as well, that there are times that it takes a while to come to a solution. So just trying to build that student culture where kids feel safe to wonder and to come to conclusions on their own.
Really well done. Of course, that's going to start with building the teacher culture on how to model that intellectual humility and how to run a seminar that doesn't predetermine the answers. What grades were you mostly discussing? Were you discussing high school, lower school, or the whole, across the elementary school? Great. Yeah.
At my school, we're K-12.
Perfect. Yeah.
So we have transfers coming in at second,
Yeah.
But those third and fourth and fifth graders up through high school, when we get our new kiddos in, if they're coming from schools that haven't been doing this,
Yeah.
they're waiting for the information.
It's a public charter school?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're waiting for that information, and they're waiting, but they also come from that student culture, from the home culture sometimes, where it's not okay to show you're wrong. So
Yeah.
it's changing that perspective and getting them to realize that it is okay to
Yeah.
not be right, because that's how we get to the right
Yeah.
answer. So
I think that's such a great point. How do you build a culture of trust, a culture where people can make mistakes, and how do you pursue wonder unless you take risks? You know, sometimes wonder comes from the wrong questions, or all the questions are okay, but the wrong answers, and you keep pushing forward. So that's great. All right, next. Oh, excellent. This group was very active in their conversation, so we're going to hear some really great things here.
So I guess on a related point, we were talking about number 4 and 5, and one thing we talked about was if you as the teacher never seem at a loss for words, why would your students ever seem at a loss for words? And so when a student asks a question that catches you off guard, being willing to be silent at the front of the room for even 10 seconds or something, right, which feels like an eternity, but demonstrating for them the humility, and fighting against that pressure to achieve. So I guess for teachers in front of the classroom, making a point to try and lean into those moments of silence in front of the students.
Excellent. Both of those were very well related. Yes, ma'am. I feel like I'm on a talk show here. I don't watch talk shows.
Thank you. So something in our group that was discussed a lot was staff turnover, and so that can relate to faculty culture. Something I discussed with our group was how we can be in the disposition of a student, and turning to the internet, we can look for resources to instill the wonder that we want to show our students in our education. So an example for me was I fortunately had a teacher who was very much into Edgar Allan Poe. She loved him, she decorated her room with him, and she loved Midsummer Night's Dream. She showed us that wonder and Edgar Allan Poe, like the Telltale Heart. And it didn't occur to me like how immersive that experience could be, not only through the text, but through someone acting it out. When we saw like an actor voicing that out, even though there wasn't all these background drops and like scenes where action was happening, just his voice and how Eleanor displayed earlier for us saying her poem, it put the experience into full color for me. I could visualize everything, and I can imagine teachers doing the same thing with education and showing their students how to get into the readings. So I think maybe something that can prevent that staff turnover is encouraging yourself and the students you're teaching to love the same thing that you are encouraging to teach yourself, and that's surrounding yourself with the people who have a knack for that kind of thing and who can teach you to be engaged in that kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to say is like be a student at the feet of the people who have a love for that so that you can have a love for it.
Very well said. Yeah. Oh, no sweat, no sweat.
That's all right. So we were looking at a couple of different things. One is art and architecture can foster a sense of wonder. It can also destroy it. And so one of the pro tips from Brighton was hang the pictures in a well-ordered, leveled way. Use like actual museum putty to do so. Create an aesthetics document that says what our teachers should actually shoot for in the creation of their classrooms and why we want to shoot for it. Another wonder killer is just the things that kill the wonder for our teachers, right? Just the tyranny of the urgent, never feeling like we have a moment to wonder, let alone inspire our students to do so. And so some practical ideas that we had was to maybe do a PD on the Eisenhower method, teach how to emphasize importance over the tyranny of the urgent, reminding our teachers that actually wonder itself is the important thing, that our job description is to help our students love learning, and that they have the ability to cut units. As G.K. Chesterton says, a sculptor must reject stone. And so our teachers are not mere practitioners or deliverers of the curriculum, they are shapers of it as well. And so they should have the ability to cut things from it in order to make sure that the right things are being emphasized. Also just helping our teachers be able to identify primary versus secondary sources of support. At Archway Scottsdale, we've been around since 2010. There's a lot of fantastic resources that our school has created, a lot of great resources that Great Hearts has given. Not all of them are created equal. And I was realizing that some of our faculty thought that they actually had to use everything that was being given to them in the teacher binder. Which actually contained worksheets, unfortunately. And so just kind of going around with my Dean of Academics and letting them know the primary source of information is the teacher resource portal. It's the Great Hearts curriculum. It's not all these other things. They're just there to help. We realized also that worksheets are the primary killer of wonder. And the practical solution there is just burn them all. Just burn every one of them.
So we're going to start a fire with these worksheets. Anthony, really, really well done. I think we have probably time for one or two more. That was really, really well done. Aesthetics matter, don't they? You know, everything gets into our students' souls, and we want them to look at the very best. So, and burn the worksheets.
We talked about use of time, especially at the end of a class or rushing. I'm from California. I get 35 minutes a day for chemistry and physics. And so we talked about how I don't want to invite them to do lots of problems in that time, though I'm very tempted or pressured. And I want them to go outside. I want them to see nature. I want them to sketch nature. I want them to take the time to wonder at the night sky. And then any of yours? We talked about use of time.
Well, how practically, so going outside, but would you change the use of academic time in certain ways during the day?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking like actually take away a lot of their practice, do it together and help them work through it, but
Less independent work?
no, using it to sketch nature, to talk about the night sky, see the night sky.
Are you in a place you can do that? Is your school in a place you can do that?
Let's see.
In Phoenix, all the lights blur out. One or two more. We still have a little bit of time. All right.